It is wide receivers week at Lettermen Row. That means we have a full week to talk about Jeremiah Smith and the best wide receiver room in America. That is Mick Walker here to help me break it down. I am just Spencer Holbrook. Let's talk wide receivers. Mick, Ohio State, obviously best receiver room in the country, year in and year out. Emeka Egbuka off to the seasons at Ohio State, 3 remarkable years, and then, of course, his freshman year, in which he still did really well during that freshman year. They've got Carnell Tate back. They've got Brandon Ennis coming into a bigger role. Bryson Rogers is ready for a bigger role. And, oh, by the way, they've got that Jeremiah Smith fella, who is not only the best receiver in the country, but the best player in college football, point blank, period. We do not hear any arguments otherwise. Mick, how are you, and are you ready to talk wide receivers?
Always ready to talk wide receivers. Jeremiah Smith, Brandon Ennis, Carnell Tate, Bryson Rogers, Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter. Like, we can go on and on and on and just spend the whole day talking about them. But I think we'll try and keep it between 20 to 30 minutes here and keep it between the lines.
Between the lines, maybe. We'll see. Sometimes we get a little off those rails. Jeremiah Smith, let's start there. I thought it was really interesting, Mick, that in the spring we were talking to Brian Hartline about some of the things that Jeremiah needed to improve on. And as dumb as that sounds, he had over 1,300 yards receiving. He had, I think, 15 touchdowns as a freshman. He caught over 70 passes. He's well on his way to breaking all of the records that he's going to need to break at Ohio State if he plays 3 full seasons, and Ohio State gives him a decent amount of targets. Hartline was interesting in the way he said it. I'll pull up a little bit of the quote. Probably should have been a little more prepared here. He talked about how he's really young and he doesn't operate like that, but he operates beyond his years. He said the technique, fundamentals, he's chasing a lot of guys. When you get to a certain point where you're doing a really good job, you're chasing that 1%, the finite growth. It's not always seen on film. The individual may feel it, whether it be your base or your technique and the consistency at which you do those things. That's what he's chasing. It's so minuscule, the details that Jeremiah Smith needs to improve on. Do you think that he will be able to do that and elevate even more? And maybe that doesn't mean stats, because he's going to have the attention of the world on him, Mick. But do you think that Jeremiah Smith is going to be able to elevate even more after what we saw as a freshman?
I think he will be, but again, it's something similar to what Ryan Hartline said. Like, the results might not be visible on film. I don't know if we're going to see Jeremiah Smith is going to improve that 1%, and all of a sudden he's going to have another 300 receiving yards, another 6 touchdowns. He could come back next year and have lower stat totals, but still be a better overall wide receiver because there's things that he still needs to work on. I think Brian Hartline probably knows the right buttons to press there. I mean, also when Jeremiah Smith goes back to Miami, he's probably throwing with Geno Smith, who's his cousin, I believe. Like, he's working on things daily. Like, I assume that they're just going to continue to make him a better wide receiver. So I do think he'll get there. I'm fascinated to see what it looks like when it comes to Jeremiah Smith being better, because the numbers might not just be better.
Yeah, I liken it to when Marvin Harrison Jr. had his sophomore season, and we're like, okay, how does he even get better off of that? He had 1,200 yards, I think. He was the best receiver in college football, and it wasn't close. Of course, he didn't win the Biletnikoff Award that year, just like Jeremiah Smith last year was the best receiver in college football. I don't know how close it was, but he didn't win the Biletnikoff Award. I don't know what voters were watching, but whatever. They decided on that two-way player who was a good receiver, but anyway, we'll talk about that later. Jeremiah Smith, almost in a way, is like Marvin in that way, where I don't think Marvin had quite as good of a junior year as he had a senior year, even though he kind of put Ohio State on his back as a junior. He was so good at helping Kyle McCord get through everything that he had to get through in 2023. But, it didn't look as fun maybe as it did with CJ Stroud in 2022. He had 1,263 yards in 2022. He had 1,211. He had 77 catches in 2022. He had 67 in 2023. He had 14 touchdowns in each of those years. I think there's a way that we see Jeremiah maybe a little bit like that, where he had 1,300 yards this past year, but he played 16 games. Maybe if they play 14 games, he has, 1,300 yards again, almost similar stats, and maybe has a bigger impact on the biggest games. But I do think that the way that teams are going to have to go away, just focus solely on him, is going to kind of maybe hinder him a little bit, even though I don't know how you really stop him, even if you bracket him or put 2 guys on him.
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, that's what Jim Knowles, who's now at Penn State, or Tosh Lupoy at Oregon or even Link Martindale at Michigan. Like, that's what they're focusing on doing this offseason. So it's up to Brian Hartline, Ryan Day, Tyler Bowen, Keenan Bailey, all this brain trust of Ohio State offense to kind of come together and make sure Jeremiah Smith's going to be able to succeed. Carnell Tate's being used. Brandon Ennis is going to be used. Like, it'll be an interesting kind of meld of everything going on. And obviously it starts with what Jeremiah Smith's going to look like.
You know what I'm really fascinated by, and this is maybe a little too in the weeds for a June the 3rd show, but there is one game in particular that I'm just super fascinated to see what a team does against Jeremiah, and I think it could give a blueprint to what we're going to see teams try to do against him for the rest of the year. It's not the Texas game. I think Texas will try to play him straight up, because I think Texas thinks they have the athletes, and you know what? He had 1 catch for 3 yards against Texas the first meeting back to Cotton Bowl. So, they did a good job on him. Obviously, they had the Thorpe Award winner. They don't have him anymore in Jahdae Barron. He's in the NFL. But I'm not really taking the Texas game as like a what we're going to see for Jeremiah. What I'm really anxious to see on how a team tries to cover Jeremiah, it's definitely not Grambling in Ohio. Like, good luck to Grambling in Ohio on covering Jeremiah Smith. It's Washington. Who's Washington's defensive coordinator, Mick?
My friend and pal, Ryan Walters, the former Purdue head coach.
And what does Ryan Walters do more than anybody on earth?
Ryan Walters is going to play man coverage on the outside.
When he was at Illinois ran man coverage 97% of the time, and that is not an exaggeration. When he was at Purdue, and he didn't have the athletes to run man coverage, they still ran man coverage 90% of the time, and it got him fired because they were horrendous defensively, among other things. He is going to play Jeremiah Smith man-to-man coverage at Washington. Now, whether they double him and it's man-to-man with a double, that's why I'm so anxious to see. Because he could either provide a blueprint for teams on how to cover Jeremiah moving forward, or he could provide the textbook on what not to do against Jeremiah Smith out there in late September at Husky Stadium. Like, that's the one where I'm going to circle and say, like, okay, this is what teams think they can do against Jeremiah. Now, all of that's to say, and I promise that this Washington thing is a transition, everything that teams focus on to Jeremiah is something that they're not going to be able to focus on Carnell Tate. I don't lump Brandon Ennis into that just yet because we don't really know what he's going to be as a slot receiver. We think he's going to start in the slot, but man, like, if you're dedicating one half the field to just stopping Jeremiah Smith, there's another former 4 to 5 star guy on the other side of the field in Carnell Tate who had 700 and some receiving yards last year, maybe the quietest 700-yard season of all time. He was really good for Ohio State last year. A couple drops that you want to see cleaned up, especially in that Texas game, just a stone cold drop in the end zone. But you really have to pay attention to Carnell Tate. You can't dedicate everything to Jeremiah Smith because I think Carnell is going to have a really good season this year with all that attention on the other side of the field.
Yeah, and I think you've even seen that. Obviously, Spencer did it all when it comes to the way too early mocks and kind of tracked that down. And Carnell Tate popped up in a lot of those, and it's not because he had 1,500 yards and 20 touchdowns and it was clear cut he's the top receiving threat in the country. It's because when these guys start looking at a little bit of film and they trust what Brian Hartline's doing and you trust what Ohio State does, you go, this guy has the traits. He's already has somewhat of the production that he's going to be a good wide receiver, like at Ohio State and probably in the NFL one day. Like, he's going to block his butt off. He's going to catch the ball. Like you said, some untimely drops, like the Texas one comes to mind. He had another one in that Michigan game on that final drive that just kind of didn't click. Obviously, he's not the reason why they lost that Michigan game, but there was a drop in there. But still, there's a lot of things that he has shown already, and I'm interested to see what it kind of steps off to as now he enters as a junior, and he's kind of a leader in the room, even though that's not really his vibe or personality.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch. And then, all the time we talk about these Ohio State slot receivers. Look at the past when Garrett Wilson was in the slot and Solave moved into the slot. When you had Emeka Ibuka in the slot for so long. Oh, by the way, there's a guy named Jackson Smith-Njigba who's still doing it in the slot out in Seattle and had 1,000 yards last year as a first-round pick. Ryan Day, KJ Hill before all of those guys. Ryan Day loves his slot receivers. Does that mean Brandon Ennis is going to have 1 billion catches and 1 billion yards and 1 billion touchdowns? Hey, maybe. Like, he's a former 4 to 5 star guy. He's really shifty. He's pretty stocky for what he is too, and I think that that's going to help him a little bit. He's got really good burst. I love what I see from Brandon Ennis right now. I think he's going to be really good, but he's going to have to earn everything he gets because Bryson Rodgers is pushing for playing time, and Bryson Rodgers had a really good spring from everything that I saw. Mylan Graham is drawing rave reviews, he looked like Garrett Wilson in the spring game, and that's not just because he was wearing the number 5. It's because he's really good at this. So like they've got options in the slot. And then I think Max Clare figures into this a little bit, not because he's a receiver, because he's not, but because he can line up in the slot and terrorize defenses because he's a different body type from a slot receiver, especially when they're dedicating, an entire safety and a corner over to Jeremiah Smith. Like this slot receiver position, and I can't just say Brandon Ennis, even though I think he's the lead guy there. This slot receiver position, I think, has so much potential for Ohio State heading into this season.
Yeah, and you especially have to factor it in, like when it comes to just looking at it and going, Ohio State still wants to run their 12 personnel stuff. Like Bennett Christian and all those guys are still going to run the field. Will has Merrick. Like obviously that means Max Clare can kind of be on the field and flex out a bit, like you mentioned, and we'll talk about that more in tight ends week and kind of break that down when it comes to what Max Clare can do. But that just leaves less and less snaps for Brandon Ennis, Bryson Rogers, like you mentioned, Mylan Graham to play in that spot. Sorry, excuse me. Brandon Ennis has been like, we throw it around a lot nowadays, but Brandon Ennis has been a dog since he was in high school. He's just kind of that guy when he gets on the football field. He's not that guy when it comes to just taking over games like Jeremiah Smith, but I imagine if we pulled everybody in that wide receiver room, including Brian Hartline, he's like the heart and soul of that wide receiver room, the leader of that room because of who he is as a person. And I think we'll kind of see that dog mentality, that kind of the dog like way of going about things on the field this year. At least I hope we do, because I think Brandon Ennis is a good guy and a guy that has a lot of talent. And it hasn't fully, he hasn't had a full amount of opportunities yet. So I'm excited to see what he does, along with what Bryson Rogers can push forward, Mylan Graham can do.
Yeah, the last time Ohio State went through a season and didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver in the slot, was 2022 or 2023 with Kyle McCord. But every year other than that, so that was when the passing game, it wasn't what we expect from Ohio State. And that's not a slight. Maybe it's a little bit of a slight at McCord, but it's more of a thing where like they just didn't live up to the passing standard. Receivers and quarterback, the whole offense just was not what we think Ohio State's offense should be. They were scoring in the 30s. There were games where they were even scoring in the 20s, like not what you thought that you were going to get. 2019, 2021, 2020 was a COVID year. We kind of just throw that out anyway. 2022, 2024. All of those seasons have 1,000-yard receivers in the slot. So we shouldn't expect anything different, but they might have a 1,000-yard receiver in the aggregate because of how many different slot weapons there are. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I'm really excited about what the slot position could be for Ohio State this year just because of the amount of talent there. Last but not least, we will not just skip over him at all. Quincy Porter lost his black stripe in the spring. He was the only Ohio State freshman, early enrollee, to lose his black stripe. He is really, really talented, Mick. I don't know if he's going to earn playing time right away, but I will say this. As loaded as the slot position is for Ohio State, with Ennis, Rogers, Graham, and Max Clare kind of figuring into that as well, it's kind of thin depth-wise, not talent-wise, on the outside. You've got Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. They never need to come off the field, yada, yada, yada. We get that. But if they ever do need to come off the field, the next guy up on the outside is Quincy Porter as a true freshman. And he's a former 5-star guy. No, he does not come in with the same pedigree as Jeremiah Smith. Nobody ever will. But you saw enough from Quincy Porter to think that he can probably contribute if he needs to at some point this year.
Yeah, and I remember talking to Quincy Porter's wide receiver coach after when I saw him this past season at Massillon. He said Ryan Day loves how big Quincy Porter is, 6'4", 6'5". We flash forward to National Signing Day. Ryan brings up again how Quincy Porter is 6'4", 6'5". He's a big-bodied outside wide receiver. Obviously, they have Jeremiah Smith, like you mentioned, but other than that, Carnell Tate's 6'1". Brandon Ennis is probably 6 foot flat. Mylan Graham might be 6'1". Like, you're talking about a lot of guys that don't have the large stature of Jeremiah Smith, except for Quincy Porter. And obviously, I think he's going to have to find his ways onto the field, whether that's as a blocker, whether that's as just another outside wide receiver. But, man, I am going through it today, Spencer. We talked about this on the last podcast, but
we're fighting through adversity, Mick.
I am, and we got camps coming up this week. We got lawnmowers going outside. It is just a full June of madness. But, yeah, I'm really excited to see what Quincy Porter does. I think if we continue to just kind of build off the freshman wide receiver as we riff a little bit here, I think Phillip Bell looked good this spring. Des Jones looked good this spring. So, like, the whole freshman wide receiver corps that came in, even Barkman Miller flashed at times. I'm excited for him, and I think Quincy Porter is the headliner of that group, obviously.
Yeah, if there's one guy that's going to get on the field, I think it's going to be Quincy Porter. Now, one of those guys, other guys could play maybe a special teams role. Phillip Bell, I liked what I saw from Phillip Bell at times this spring. I think he's got some shiftiness to him. Kid out from Southern California. We won't put any labels on what he could be, but there were some flashes that make you think like, okay, like I can see why Brian Hartline really liked this guy in high school. And he was a guy that I think Ohio State beat out USC and a couple other schools for. Like, there were some heavy hitters there going after Phillip Bell, and Brian Hartline obviously wins his recruiting battles. So I'm excited for him. It's just the position he plays and what the Ohio State receiver room is constructed as right now. I do not see a role for him as a freshman. Now, could he surprise me? Absolutely. Absolutely. Jackson Smith and Jigba had, in his first ever game, had a one-handed touchdown catch. It's maybe the best catch I've ever seen against Nebraska in that COVID year. So, like, guys can surprise you, but I do not expect that he will make like a huge impact as a freshman, whereas Quincy Porter, I think he will. Anything else, Mick, on this Ohio State wide receiver room? Obviously, Brian Hartline moving into the offensive coordinator role, how that changes anything. We can kind of get into that a little bit more during the coaching staff week that we're going to do later in the summer at lettermenrow.com. But I don't think that it changes a lot. There was a lot of chatter this spring about Brian Hartline and the way that he organized himself. He's the most organized guy in the building now. The way that he was not forced to take anything away from his time developing his wide receivers as he was still coaching the offense. I loved what I heard about that.
Yeah, I mean, hat tip to Devin Jordan, who's the assistant wide receivers coach. He played at Ohio State. He was a former position coach in D1 at some point. He is now just Brian Hartline's assistant. He makes this kind of whole operation run where Brian Hartline can step up and be an offensive coordinator and not really lose a lot of time because those young guys or those guys like a Quincy Porter or some of these freshmen get to work with Devin Jordan constantly. You get some of these guys that are able to develop kind of underneath Devin Jordan, kind of then go up into the Brian Hartline group of development too once you kind of get to that stage. Other than that, there's nothing really too interesting going on. I do daydream one day about the idea of having Jeremiah Smith in the slot just because why not when he's a junior, and then you have Quincy Porter on the outside at 6'4". You have Chris Henry on the outside and the other side as a true freshman at 6'5", and you just have nothing but 6'4", 6'5" wide receivers, and one of them is in the slot because Jeremiah Smith is that good. Like, that'll be fascinating to watch, but that's 2 years away. Other than that, it's honestly Brian Hartline makes this whole topic, this whole idea kind of boring because of the standard of greatness. We can't even really get into recruiting because he has 4 wide receivers committed. All 4 are 4 stars. Chris Henry Jr. being the 5-star guy. Like he's the headliner, but then you have 3 other guys that are a ton of trades: Caden Dixon-Wyatt, Brock Boyd, Jaden Ricketts. They'll probably bring in a 5th official visitor later this month. We'll talk about that kind of on the message board in the Lettermen Lounge. $1 for your first 7 days. Get all of our official visit coverage, recruiting coverage, wide receiver week coverage. Like we just have it all going on over there. So, like again, Brian Hartline makes this boring, but Lettermen Row won't be boring the rest of this month. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, you got Chris Henry Jr. committed. You've got Jaden Ricketts committed. You've got Brock Boyd committed. I mean,
we didn't even mention the 2027 class where he has number 1 wide receiver Jameer Brown out of Heber Heights, Wayne already committed, and he's recruiting Eric McFarland, who's probably going to be the number 1 wide receiver in 2028. Like, we just build on it and build on it. It gets, again, very boring because he finds the number 1 guy on the board, goes and gets him and shuts it down.
Isn't there another Harrison coming up too?
There is Jet Harrison in the 2028 class. So this whole thing, if we really dig into it and build scope out, and we're just riffing again here on recruiting, Brian Porter is the brother of Quincy Porter in the 2027 class. He'll probably camp at Ohio State this summer. So maybe he's already got offers from Oregon, I believe, or if not Oregon, some SEC, some Penn State, some Big Ten offers. He's out of Bergen Catholic's going to be their stud, and I think they really like him, and Ohio State likes him as well in the 2027 class. So that's one guy you got to talk about. Jameer Brown's another. Then we also talk about, like you said, Jet Harrison in 2028, Eric McFarland, who's from Las Vegas, but now plays at IMG in 2028 in the 2028 class. Like, that's 2 wide receivers in 2027, 2 wide receivers in 2028 that it feels like we can already kind of circle and target early on just because of the ties to the program and the talent. Like, we're talking about guys that are all able to play at Ohio State. Like, Jet just earned an offer recently. I imagine Brian Porter will walk away with an offer when he camps this summer, and it'll just be up and at him from there. Just a ton of wide receiver recruiting news. But again, it'll be somewhat boring because he has so many guys coming in that are so talented, that have ties to the program, and are recruitments that he can win pretty much in his sleep at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's some middle schoolers that are probably going to be getting offers here soon. As the 5-star next up, Jeremiah Smith type wide receiver. It's crazy what Brian Hartline does on the recruiting trail and what he does in developing these guys. We just get to talk about it. It does get a little monotonous because they're so good, but we're going to do a good job covering over at lettermenrow.com. That's Mick Walker. I'm just Spencer Holbrook. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys over at lettermenrow.com, where you can get 7 days of premium coverage at lettermenrow.com for just $1. That's all of Mick's recruiting coverage, Alex Gleitman's recruiting coverage, and my stuff on the team side. It's official visit season. Recruiting obviously king in the month of June, but we have plenty of coverage on both sides of things. Both sides of that coin kind of covered there. Flip one, heads or tails. You can read about team or recruiting. For Mick Walker, I'm just Spencer Holbrook. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys back here. We're going to break down some official visit stuff on Wednesday or Thursday. Haven't really decided yet. We'll figure it out. That's Mick. I'm Spencer. Thanks for being here. We'll see you guys soon.